You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
Welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz. Coming up on today's episode, Evan Pricco is in conversation with the artist, activist and co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors.
That's the way it goes in the city of Compton, boy.
Thank you once again for joining us here at Radio Juxtapoz, the podcast exploring the contemporary art world with those that make it. My name is Doug Gillen, and if this is the first time you've joined us here at Radio Juxtapoz, welcome. Radio Juxtapoz is the podcast arm of Juxtapoz magazine. Every week or so, we invite someone from within the art world to sit down with us and dig into their practice, their inspirations, and life in general. Coming up today, we have Patrisse Cullors in conversation with the editor-in-chief of Juxtapoz magazine, Evan Pricco. If you're listening to this episode, there's obviously a strong chance you are familiar with Patrisse's work. Here's a little primer for anyone less familiar. Patrisse Cullors is a multifaceted artist, activist and author, and probably most well known as one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Cullors' artistic practice is deeply intertwined with her activism and is known for using performance art as a tool for protest and storytelling, bringing attention to issues of police brutality, racial inequality, and systematic oppression. Her art is characterized by its raw emotional power and commitment to highlighting the lived experiences of marginalized people. Cullors uses her artistic platform to create spaces for healing, dialogue, and empowerment, often drawing on her own personal experiences and those of the broader Black community. Patrisse is widely recognised for her pivotal role in the Black Lives Matter movement, which she co-founded in 2013 alongside Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi. The movement emerged as a response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting of Trayvon Martin, a black teenager in Florida. BLM has very much since grown into a global movement advocating for an end to systematic racism, police violence, and other forms of oppression faced by black communities. Her 2022 book, An Abolitionist Handbook, 12 Steps to Changing Yourself, charts a framework for how everyday artists, activists and organisers can effectively fight for an abolitionist present and future. Patrisse Cullors reflects a deep commitment to social justice and the liberation of black people. Through her art, she challenges audiences to confront uncomfortable truths and inspires them to take action. Her influence extends beyond the art world into the realms of social and political activism, making her a key figure in the ongoing fight for equality and human rights. If you enjoyed this episode, please make some noise, let us know from wherever you can. Let's get into it right now with Evan Pricco in conversation with Patrisse Cullors here on Radio Juxtapoz.
We're recording. I feel like once it starts recording, my voice has to get into this very professional high. The guest today on Radio Juxtapoz is the great artist, activist, abolitionist, writer, everything, Patrisse Cullors. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, such a big fan of you and the work that you're doing with Juxtapoz. It's an honor for me, honestly.
I feel like this is going to be slightly unfair to people but I'm going to do it anyway. You know, when somebody says, well, we had a great conversation that you could never hear. We had a great conversation at a picnic table outside a gallery, the gallery in which you had your first solo show at Charlie James Gallery this past summer. The show's down, it's been down for a little bit. If you could get in reflective mode, how did that experience sort of make you feel about making, and how did it sort of just feel in terms of just kind of in the creation mode? How do you feel in reflection?
Thank you for that question. I've been actually sitting with it a lot and sitting with the work that was made and the impact on me and the impact on my community that came and saw the work. I think like many artists, after we've kind of birthed a thing for people, there's sort of a moment of grief and pensiveness for this thing that we shared and then sort of kind of released it, depending on if people purchased the work or if it whatever gets written about it. Like there's just all these experiences and feelings that come with the making and then the presenting. Feel in this time, especially as we're just sort of like experiencing some of the most horrific tragedies like across the world, that the work of protection, which is so much of what this show is about, it just keeps resonating, like resonating. Like, what does actual protection look like, and how do we talk about protection and also talk about like nonviolence? Is that possible? You know, what does liberation look like, and how do our communities, often so many of our communities who are at the margins, who are impacted by the violence of governments, like what does it look like to take our power back? I just read a poem by a Puerto Rican Ashkenazi Jewish poet, Aurora. I don't remember her full name, but I remember the first name, Aurora. And she wrote this beautiful poem called Summons that is about there's a line that is like, no governments. We can't wait for the governments. Like the governments aren't going to save us.
They told me we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare to say every life is precious. So it will have to be us.
It's interesting because we're in an election year and we're missing like the movie or the TV series that is the USA. One day we're like, oh, it's going to be Biden for the Democratic Party. And then the next day it's like, no, Biden's out. Kamala's in. History is being made. Icon, da-da-da-da. And I'm just sort of sitting here being like, sure, yes. And these people aren't going to save us. That's a long response to that.
No, so actually I was going to wait till later to use this quote, but my girlfriend sent me this quote this morning. It's from the artist Dorothea Tanning, and it's, art has always been the raft onto which we climb to save our sanity. I don't see a different purpose for it now.
Ooh, chills. Correct.
Thought you'd like that one.
Well, it's interesting because Adrienne Marie Brown, who's a good friend of mine, writer, artist as well, like we've just texted each other we've known each other for years, but over the last year we've just we keep texting each other saying like, all we can do is make art right now.
Right.
Like it's the thing that makes me feel most sane.
Well, okay, this is something I've been thinking about, is that we're in this really kind of this interesting dichotomy of time, is where language seems, and the potential of language seems very expansive. Like we are trying to reimagine the world with just a better use of language, with art, with more art, where art is expansive, it's mind expanding. We're trying to think of all these ways of expanding our consciousness, expanding our appreciation for each other. But at the same time, social media has sort of made language very, very limited. And it's like a very weird time of expansion and limitation that's like battling with each other constantly. And I wonder, like, when you start making art, and when you're an artist, like you're trying to expand as much. So like when you were going into this body of work, what was like the expansive kind of world you were creating?
You got to see the show, right? There was like a series of works that were framed sort of in a more traditional way. And there's a series of works that were just like hung raw, machetes essentially.
Right.
If you can like imagine going into like a room where like a warrior is like keeps his tools. That's what I wanted people to experience when they walked into this. And for some people, you know, everyone's gonna have a different reaction, and that's the beauty of art. Like there's no sort of like one way to view or experience. For me, it was a literal like, I am always making work that I need first, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because why make it? Like I can't actually think about the market, what it is as a commodity. I like to make nice work. I like to make beautiful work. I like to make meaningful work. I like to make work that's visually appealing, that both in my performance work, my visual artwork. So I care about aesthetics. I care about, but I mostly care about what it makes me feel like first. And so I went into the making process around how can I build a body of work that makes me feel what my expansion is? What am I working on? What are my edges? And as a Black woman in America, you know, Malcolm has his favorite quote, the most hated, the most disrespected, you know, person in America is the Black woman. And it's not untrue. And I've both experienced it, I've witnessed it. And I was like, okay, I've made all this work. You know, I've been an artist my whole life. Many people know me. I mean, people are starting to know me more now as artists. Many people know me as like an activist, you know, like
right.
Black Lives Matter, Dignity and Power Now, Justice LA. You know, I've taken on the jails, I've taken on the police. And in that shape, and that organizer shape, I am like a warrior. Like I know that person very well, but like in my personal private Patrisse life, I am like really tender. I lack a lot of boundaries. I am working on who I am. Like those are two different people. It's kind of like, you know, I don't want to say it's a performance, the organizer Patrisse, but it's a shape I've taken on over the years. It's the only way I'd be able to take on the police. Like, because the Patrisse that's like not that is like, I'm scared. I'm scared most of the time.
But we're not one thing. And we're supposed to be looked at from very different angles, and we have different sides, and we have different ways in which that we approach the world, and the ways that when is needed, we can become something that is slightly greater than ourselves. Correct? I mean, that's what I think. That
is correct.
Yeah,
that is correct. And you know what's a trip? And I will tie it back to the art making and expansion. The trippy part of this is when it becomes what the world only sees you as. It's really hard. Personally, it was really hard for me to understand who I was beyond that, because it became, I mean, one of the largest movements in in our history of this country, you know. Yeah. And so for me, I was like, well, who am I? Like, and art always brings me back to me, to who I am, to the many parts of me. And so when I was making this work, I was like, oh, okay, like, what do I want for myself? What am I calling in for myself right now? And it was like protection. I want to feel protected, and I want to feel the edges of myself. And I want to, and the tradition I practice, because much of this work comes from the center of it is through this Yoruba tradition that I practice called Ifa. We talk about the machete as clearing the way, clearing the road. And so I was also thinking about what are the things I want to clear from my life? What do I want to let go of? What do I want to release? I have a tendency, both in relationships and in stuff, to just hold on to people and things longer than I should. And so, in fact, I had a friend come over to help me do like cleaning, just like clearing, not even cleaning, just clearing. And she was like, why do you need all this? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'll need it for an art project. Maybe I'll need it for my child. Maybe. And it was like, no, it's okay to let go. It's okay to release. And so this body of work symbolized that. It was like, what are the ways that I can protect myself? What are the tools of protection? And also, what are the tools that can like help me clear and release? And so that was like the first place I went to, like looking at protective tools, because the reality is like I actually don't want to go around like using the machetes against people. It's like not in my makeup. I don't want to be violent, and also like I want people to know that I can protect myself, that I have these tools to protect myself. And so that became really important. And I don't think it's done. Like I think that I'm in this place of like the next phase of work is going to keep focusing on protection, because after that show went down, I just kept thinking about, okay, what are the other objects of protection? What are the other tools of protection?
Yeah.
So that's where the expanse is for me right now.
So because I went to the opening night of the show, and I remember thinking, are these machetes, are they being used for clearing paths, or are they being used as a means of protection versus violence? And I was trying to like figure out, and I figured you were playing around with both those symbols.
Absolutely.
Right. Which goes into sort of this nuance of how art can be expansive, because art can be many things, as well as you.
Precisely. I think a lot about like what is called like ancient artifacts, like these tools that were created, whether it was like an ancient Yoruba society where you sort of look at the wood making or the creation of all these tools that are often dedicated to the gods that are activated. They're not supposed to be things that are just sit on a wall that you look at and peer at and gaze at. They're these activating tools. So I see my work as they're supposed to be activated. I prayed over every single piece. I sat and prayed with it, and I told it stories, and I want these works to be animated, because when they go off to maybe someone's home or another museum or even in the gallery space, I want people to step in and be charged by them and charge them back, because I do believe everything is charged. Every material we're talking through, this technology that comes from the earth that then gets imbued, and now we can view each other, and then someone else can witness it. There's a charging that happens, and when we divorce ourselves from the charge of our art, I actually think we divorce ourselves from the spirit. Folks could have their own experiences, whether people are atheists and they don't believe that's fine. Like that's people's own belief system. But my belief system and why I make work is because I'm interested in the charge of work. I'm interested in what the work can do beyond what I've done to it, and then what it will do in the world. And I've seen that in my own life with the tools that I, receive in my spiritual practice. And I've seen how activating them improves, clears paths for me and the people around me.
This is going to be a slightly jumbled, but I'm going to just work through this. We're going to work through this together. One of the things that's interesting about art, and especially the way that you presented these works, is that it almost had this sort of futuristic feeling of like, these are the tools that were used. These are like, we're in the future, and these are like the retired tools of clearing the space of...
You see me.
But you are known as one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, of working in action in now, like in the present. And so I want to know, like, is there a difference for you in the art making process of contextualizing a huge swath of time, whereas activism can be very much of the present? So what is the difference for you in terms of the different sides of Patrisse, like how you approach both of these things? And also like as a guidebook for other people, how they can be an activist, but at the same time be slightly just working in their studio. Things don't have to be so immediate. They can be like timeless. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay. Love that. I know that you both follow politics and art by that question. It's good. It's a good question. My pragmatic self is the organizer. Like when I'm in organizer mode, I'm like, these are the things, I'm like very detail oriented. These are the things that need to happen. This is how we're going to get to the mission. It is very like in the present, in the now, with a vision for our future always. But like, how do we do it right now? Like, how do we make sense of it right now? And it's a very different Patrisse. Like it's a very different Patrisse. My artist self is like, I spend a lot of time in nature before I make. I'm like in deep prayer, lots of spiritual conversations. I'm in a lot of like, sort of like talking to tree, like, I'm building out a proposal for something right now. Can't share the details, but I got invited to it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to talk to the oak trees and like have them share with me what this project should be. And lots of downloads, lots of like kind of listening to something bigger than me. And then it gets synthesized. Like then I'm like, okay, this is like where we're going. This is how we make sense of the concept of this project. I feel like two very different sides of my brains, definitely. I will say that sometimes it bends though, because when I first started my local organization that has now existed for about 12 years called Dignity and Power Now. It's an organization that took on the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, successfully got Sheriff Baca out, helped shepherd in the first ever election in 100 years for a sheriff in Los Angeles County, and alongside many other organizations, shut down 2 jail plans that were going to be built in Los Angeles. Before that, I had this very intense obsession with Harriet Tubman, like so intense that I called her my wife for like years. Like I was like, I'm the wife of Harriet Tubman. Like I'm not her, but I'm her wife. And she like gives me messages, and it was a good, I would say like 1.5 years, 2 years. I had always been obsessed with Harriet since I was like a small child. Like I was always obsessed with her.
Not a bad person to be obsessed with.
You know, but the 2 years before building out Dignity and Power Now, which Dignity and Power Now was founded in 2012, and then 1 year later BLM was founded. So, you know, the 2 years before founding these 2 organizations, I was just in deep conversation with Harriet Tubman, and I didn't quite understand why I had gone down like a hyper fixation hole around Harriet. And like I was learning about, you know, there's sort of like Jesus, there's like a mythical Harriet, and then there's a historical Harriet. And so I was reading her history, and then I founded these organizations, and then like the obsession kind of went away, but it was like, oh, you were like the spirit guiding me to these projects. So I think that like that always happens. And then once I understand the mission, then I'm in go mode, and I'm like, this is the mission, this is where we're going. And then I kind of stick to the mission over time. And now in my life, you know, I've said this in a few interviews, but I feel like the first 20 plus years of my practice was to shut down, destroy, eradicate the systems of oppression, or at least build a roadmap to how to do that. And in my next 40 years of my life, you know, it's to build, repair, develop, and create a road using our imagination around what's possible for the world.
Expand. I mean, it's really comes down to that idea of like, the words destroy and all that, but you're also like, your practice is expansion. I think there's a lot of artists out there right now who feel conflicted about bravery. And like, so I'm kind of curious, like what you think about bravery in art. Because expressing yourself is brave unto itself, but there's also a lot of worry that artists think if they get too brave, they're not going to get the funding, they're not going to get the sales, they're not going to get the next show. But I'm curious with you, and a lot of stuff with Juxtapoz is about like providing different avenues for artists to get to where they want to get to. But what is bravery to you in making art in 2024?
Yeah. Great question. I
have no notes, by the way. I'm like, that's why I'm feeling good right now. I'm like, oh, it's not bad.
I love it. That's the best way to interview, honestly. I want to say this. I want to say that I've made a decision that I'm not going to rely on my art as the sole thing that will help me survive in life and raise my child. I made that decision because I've watched other Black artists and what has happened to them and how they've been devoured by a system or ignored. You know, some of my heroes, like Amiri Baraka of the Black Arts Movement, or local Black Arts Movement heroes like Jackie Sykes or Roderick Sykes, who just never ended up in the market. Like they're prolific artists, and their work sort of exists at a parallel. Like, you know, it's like the art market and then their work, and they decided to go on this other path. So I think an artist has to decide, like, how do you want to relate to the market? Like, do you want the market to dictate your work? And that's okay. Like, actually have no judgment. Like, if this is the pathway for people, or do you want your work to dictate the market? And I think a lot about Lauren Halsey's work, who clearly didn't give a fuck about the art market and was like, this is my work, this is my community, and you all happen to fuck with it, great. Like, I'm gonna keep making, and like something happened for the the market that loved it. That doesn't always happen, and the market is weird and confusing. And I just read this painful New York Times article about all these artists, these young artists.
Oh my God, that was just like,
painful to watch. And I was like, wow, that has not been my path. Like, I have a very different path to this world. And inside of that, around this question of bravery, I think that bravery is so important and necessary. I think about bravery as strategic bravery. Yeah. And I say that because we still have to deal with nefarious institutions and people who will try to destroy you if the bravery doesn't line up with their politics or values. Right. Yeah. And so I always tell artists, like I tell artists, like I told young queer people, I was queer, I am queer, and was queer very young, and experienced a lot by coming out young with very little support system outside of other teenagers. But I remember meeting other young people as I got older, and I was like, is it safe to come out? Will your family, will you be homeless? Or is it worth it? Where can you get safety? Like, can you stay in this until you're 18 and then leave? Like, I think when I talk to artists about bravery, it's like, where do you see the next 60 years of your career? Does this feel safe? Does it feel worth it to be this kind of brave? Are you willing to take the consequences and the hit for this kind of bravery? And if so, let's build a support system. We think, because we have a weird American hero journey in our brains because of this construct, that we need to be the hero, which really comes from like a Western pioneer frontier vibe, when most of those people were not heroes. They were like fleeing persecution, or many folks were being thrown to America as prisoners. Like, there's a different story. Like, they're animated as these heroes, but like, what is heroic is like community safety. Right. I wish more artists would think less as individuals and more as a community. How do we come together and protect ourselves from the market, from museums, from galleries? Like, we don't have to do this alone. And we're really taught about the artist that goes off to a retreat by themselves, makes this prolific work by themselves, comes back and it's like, that's a myth. Artists are better in community. So bravery happens in community, and that takes strategy and a kind of commitment to something bigger than our own art.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is I love the way you worded that, because I was thinking about when artists ask me like, well, how should I, when they're young artists now, I want to make it. I'm like, find your crew. Yes. Find your crew, do it together, do group shows together, because it's so much healthier to think of a movement of people, a group of people, than just one singular person going through by themselves. Like, I like the idea of like, find your crew, find your group, find your pod, and then share it within that. And then you'll feel stronger when you share on your own from that pod. What has Los Angeles meant to you?
Everything. I mean, I've never left. I'm born and raised. I'm from the San Fernando Valley, the 818, the Great 18.
Well, we're both California people. I'm from Oakland originally, but I feel it's nice talking to someone who's just been here their whole life. So we're California people. All right. So what does LA mean to you? 818.
Yeah. I love Oakland so much. I'm so sorry what's happened with your city because of big tech. I remember going back and I was like, what happened to Oakland? But I still love it.
Still love it.
Oakland feels like the country. Like, I used to leave LA and go to Oakland. It was just like so slow and like so much more chill than Los Angeles. And I know that, East Coast people laugh at that because when they come to LA, they're like, why are you all laid back with flip-flops?
Like I'm going back to New York next week and I've got like a tan. I think people are gonna be like, where have you been? I'm like, I don't know. It's just sunny here. I don't know what to tell you. By the way, I do want to say this one thing. I thought it was interesting that Kamala was talking so much about Oakland, but I thought she was from Berkeley, which made me feel really, really confused during her speech. I was like, I thought you were from, but anyway, fair enough. That's my one Democratic convention thing. Yeah.
California for you. It could be like, you know, when I say I'm from LA and then people are like, where? And I'm like, the Valley. They're like, that's not LA. I'm like, actually, technically it's LA City. So yeah.
Technically it is. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a different landscape. The Valley, the San Fernando Valley is a different landscape. It's completely shaped me. Los Angeles and the Valley specifically. I really grew up in the middle of the 80s and 90s, the early aughts. So much policing, so much police violence, while also like watching some of like the coolest pop stars like Missy Elliott and Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, like all these brilliant women, Lil' Kim, like kind of recreate, you know, this work, this music that was like all about women empowerment and challenging, you know, TLC, like challenging all the ways that women were told to be, or the stereotype of women. Like I have all these early memories of just listening to their music, which probably I shouldn't have been listening to at 9 or 10, but like latchkey kid, you know, and like I also, you know, like growing up in LA and like literally growing up on like West Coast hip hop, like that shaped my understanding of the conditions I was living in, you know, like my brother, who's 7 years older than me, was a huge hip hop head and would like sit me down and have me listen to like the lyrics of NWA and just like, do you understand? You know, both my siblings were graffiti artists, like prolific graffiti artists. They entered in the graffiti movement here in Los Angeles. And so like hip hop, graffiti, like all of that was like so a part of my shaping and that kind of art that was like outside of the institution, but then becoming institutionalized, also often criminalized. Like I grew up with like watching these artists become prolific and then watching like, you know, the criminalization of graffiti in Los Angeles, like, and turning these local graffiti crews into gangs. They weren't.
Right.
They were like children, and then they were criminalized, and then they were turned into gangs. And then I was watching, you know, Tupac, NWA, Snoop, like all be put on trial, or Congress, like taking their music but no one ever coming to ask us, like, what does it feel like to live in poverty? What does it feel like to be over policed? Like no one, there was no BLM, there was no DPN, there was no community organization other than like the NAACP, which were, you know, pretty aligned with the Democratic Party and were calling for more police. They weren't saying less police. Mm-hmm. There was nobody out to protect us. And I feel like that kind of like energy and shaping really like shaped my understanding of protection. Like we are all we have. Like the community is all we have. We can't really rely, back to, you know, earlier in this conversation, on government.
Right. Yeah. What do you remember? I mean, you're talking about some like really, you know, especially some hallmarks of juxtaposed culture, like graffiti, outsider art, hip hop, all these different things that kind of help create sort of this new narrative of how we appreciate art. But what was like the first traditional piece of art that made Patrisse want to become an artist? Like, is there anything like you're like, well, I went to a museum one day, or I went to, you know, some accidental book you opened up? Like, what was like your, like some sort of like hallmark piece of art that kind of got you moved?
I have two really good stories.
Great.
I come from a family of artists that never entered the art market. Like everyone, like visual artists, poets, singers, like this is my family, dancers. My aunt, her name is Precious. She used to make these really amazing abstract paintings from toilet paper rolls.
Unbelievable.
She would take these toilet paper rolls and like, actually, after this, I'm gonna text her and ask her like how she constructed them. But she would construct them and she would paint them, whether it was spray paint. I just remember these kind of beautiful like cylinder projects. So it was like many, many toilet paper rolls on like mounted on a canvas or wooden frame, and it would be painted, and she would give them to us. We had one in our home. She had some in her home. She was also like a very prolific interior designer. My grandmother is as well. My mother is as well. I don't have that skill set. I can't do the interior designing thing. I just like go to them for help. And so my home was always like lots of Black art, lots of Black figurines. Like, we were poor, but like our home was like always like very nice. Like, we had like, you know, my mom just like sourced things. And, you know, I go into my mom's house now and I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Like, I'm an artist.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like
all
that.
These early works of like, you know, that she would find at a thrift store of like Black people, and just like all this, you know, beautiful work that my aunt made. So that is like early visual work. You know, I didn't go to museums or galleries when I was younger. I didn't step into a gallery until I was well into like a teenager, you know, like through school. Like, and then I was a dancer. So I was a trained dancer. I started dancing very young, like when I was 11, 12 years old. I started dancing and saw the chocolate Nutcracker. And that was like, whoa, like Black people, ballerinas, like this traditional Nutcracker, but the chocolate Nutcracker. And that really shaped me. Okay. I remember seeing Misty Copeland when she was 12 at a dance competition. It was like she had just learned, you know, Misty has such an interesting story. You know, she was like, went to the local Y, I think it was, and started taking ballet at like 11, which is old for a ballerina. You know, ballerinas are usually start taking lessons at 3 or 4. And within a year, she became like prolific, and then was put into a dance competition. And then like it just, and so I was watching all these like Black women dancers. And then for me, you know, dance became kind of oppressive. Being in a dance studio, growing up I was in a dance company, in a dance studio where we were being weighed every week, you know, where we were children. You know, I watched a lot of girls grow up with eating disorders.
Right.
And and we were it was not fun anymore. I felt like the fun left. And I was like, I don't think this is what I want to be doing. Like, I don't think this is how I want to be making art. Like, this doesn't feel liberatory. And so I left the dance world, and I started producing shows with an artist collective called Tribe of the Diasporas. And I would like work with different dance partners, and we would, you know, do these shows, and I would still use dance, but then I started bringing in like objects, and dance started to become more like ritual, and dance started to be less like dance and more like movement. And then I came across Narcissister's work.
I don't know if I know that. Okay.
Oh my God, you have to look her up.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look. Okay.
Narcissister, performance artist, came from Ailey, left Ailey, and I just felt like I saw this story in me, and I was like, she's another Black woman. Her work is wild. And I started seeing all these videos of like just her with dildos, and she wears this mask all the time. And then I finally got to see her at Human Resources, like in the early aughts, and she pulled a very long scarf out of her vagina. And I was like, yeah, this is what I rock. Like, this is the road. Like, this is the road of art. And that's really like the performance art world is like what I really was like, okay, like this is the world. And I think that would then shape like my visual art language as well.
But it would also shape, I would assume, we were talking about the many shapes of you, but it would also, to me, seem like it would inform your activist life. Yeah.
If anyone looks at the sort of life of work, my life's work in the organizing space, you're going to see art at the center of it. Like literally every single project, there is an artist collective that is like creating the visual aesthetic of what this movement's going to look like. You know, the world of ending incarceration in Los Angeles, there's tons of work that came with that, like that really shaped that. The world of BLM, you know, so many artists, both I know and do not know, that shaped how the visual language of BLM, like there's just not a single place that I've developed and created that art isn't at the center. And now, you know, I co-founded a arts organization called the Crenshaw Dairy Mart. Our executive director is Ashley Blakeney. My co-founders are Ali Ressa, Alexander Doris, and Noe Olivas. And we went to USC together. We went to art school together. And,
Amazing.
You know, after USC's Roski program, we were like, you want to keep working? You want to keep rocking? And we built out this amazing, incredible organization in Inglewood that is going to be a part of PST Arts in September. So yes, art is at the center. Like it's always going to be. It's like it informs how I think about the world.
So many people look to you for how much you've given to others. Who is giving to you right now? Like, what are you getting from the world that you're feeling really grateful for? Like, what are the kind of artists or other people who like keep you going? Because you keep other people going. Who helps keep you going?
I love that. Definitely Noe and Ali Ressa, like on the art front. Those are like my spiritual siblings. Ashley Blakeney and we actually developed a piece, a performance piece to Bjork's Army of Me for a Lace performance series. And we're going to be presenting it again, reperforming it at UCI for Ulysses Jenkins' performance series that he created.
Amazing.
That's going to be amazing. I'll let you know. And
please.
Open public. And I think I have a really amazing community that really takes care of me and holds me accountable and just supports me. One of my best friends, Noni Lamar, who's both a bestie of mine and a mentor. Brent Blair, who is my mentor and teacher that has been teaching me theater, the press since I was 18 years old, that I do a lot of work inside of. And I just honestly like all of the Black women artists who are like traversing such a challenging landscape that is the art world, and like living inside of it and showing up every single day and just like making work that they're proud of, you know, like that feels so significant to me. Like Alison Sarr is a huge mentor of mine, Simone Lee, like just all these powerful Black women who have been like, I'm just going to keep making the work that's right for me. And
the Simone Lee show at LACMA is unbelievable.
Stunning.
Unbelievable. One of the things that I really appreciate about you is that in a world of conflict, in a world of troubling narratives that keep coming up over and over again, I've always liked how you present something like to strive for, and something that there is like that there are results and there are good things that can come from the efforts we put in, as opposed to maybe not providing like a roadmap to getting to places. And I really appreciate that about you. And I appreciate that with the artwork, that the show and the stuff that you're making. But what is next in terms of making for you? What's the next? I know you said the series is not over yet, and you like this idea of sort of protection, clearing paths, like that kind of. It was so beautiful the way you said that. What is next for you at the moment?
Yeah, I have, 2 exciting shows coming up in New York, and I'll be at Basel as well. I don't know if the Basel one's announced, so I'll wait till that announcement happens, but...
You just said it, so, you're just...
I won't share where I'll be.
Okay.
September 14th, I'm going to be at the Watershed Projects. Okay. That's being curated by Zoe Lukov, which is so exciting. The show's called The Yes Chef. And the Wall of Knives will be there. Nice. So that's very exciting. And then Canada Gallery is doing a group show on spirituality and art that opens October 11th. 4 of my works will be there. And then I'm, really working on the next solo show, which will be at Charlie James. The objects that I'm making, these spiritual objects, each of these have the symbols on them with the cowrie shells. So the first set of symbols I did were the Medjis, which are the twins, and Ifa. These symbols are kind of mirroring each other. The second set was the Obes, which I did and I presented at Charlie. So I'm doing the next set, and at the end of this series, I'll have made 256 objects, 256 symbols. And they are dedicated, each symbol has a set of stories. This is called the Odu Ifa. And each of the stories are actually, if you're initiated into the tradition, or if you go and get like a reading from a Babalawo or Ifa, one of these symbols come down, and kind of see them as like signs, like astrology. And then there's a bunch of stories and characteristics and things that come out. And so I'm really recreating the Odu Ifa through these objects. And I'm very focused on that. And then I'm working on a proposal right now for a project that I'll hopefully get, that's looking at the oak tree, the California oak, as a symbolism of they're these, protected trees that have been here for some hundreds of years. And I'm really sort of building out this idea of what would it look like if we protected the Black and brown indigenous bodies in California. Like, what would that actually look like? And how do we use this tree, the symbol of the oak tree, as this protected living being, as this mirror for what protection could look like for us? So I'm building out this idea and this concept right now, that fingers crossed will get accepted.
So you're feeling inspired at the moment?
I am.
No, I mean, I guess when I say that, like, because when we talked earlier this summer, we were both kind of like, we knew, and there always is that, right? There's always that kind of like, everything's okay, where are we going? But you are creatively inspired at the moment.
I am. I'm creatively inspired at the moment. I'm politically inspired by what may be possible. I am sad and depressed about the state of the world in like pragmatic terms.
Yeah, right.
But you said something earlier about like something you appreciate about me around like, just for paraphrasing purposes, like choosing to keep doing the thing and not giving up. The reason why that's true is because I really believe in the power of living beings. Like, I believe that it's alchemy to me. So like, we actually, when we put our ashe or our energy into something, like, it will change. Will it always have the outcome we want? Maybe not. But will change happen? Absolutely, because we are made of change. Like, we're stardust. We're made of this like sparkling, twinkling thing that does transform and change. And so when we negate that, when we stop ourselves from having autonomy, we forget that we actually can make that change happen because it's like science. So I believe in the alchemy of our existence.
That was Patrisse Cullors in conversation with Evan Pricco here on Radio Juxtapoz. You might remember right back at the start of the conversation, Patrisse name-checked a poem called Summons, and that was by Aurora Levins Morales. You can find that one on Instagram. We'll try to put any further relevant links into the show notes of this episode. That is it from us today here at Radio Juxtapoz. As always, we will be back with you guys real soon. Till that moment comes, take care of yourselves and each other.